Welcome to the Real Journeys of Success podcast. Yes, again, here is your host, Rob Elliott, all the way from Sydney, Australia. And I haven't gone far for this interview yet. I've stuck with someone in Sydney, Australia. Today's guest, I'm just going to look down and read here. She's an author. She's a media commentator. But most importantly, and why I invited her on the show, she's actually a mentor to boards and board members to help them be the best they can be and deliver for their shareholders or for their charity. Welcome to the stage, as we call it, Julie Garland McLellan.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here chatting with you.
No problem at all. And as we both sit here in Sydney, it's a rarity for me to these days interview someone from my own country. So thank you so much for allowing the time. And I know you're an incredibly busy lady because you do keep yourself going from one board or one non-for-profit to another. So I do thank you for your time. Were you born in Sydney or did you move here many years ago?
No, I was actually born in London. You might get that from the accent as we keep talking, although it's my parents' accent, not mine. I grew up mostly in South America, my formative years in southern Peru, and did my first degree in engineering in London, then worked in Spain with a British multinational, did my MBA there in Spanish, and met a handsome Australian, moved to Australia and married said person, and haven't changed the plan since then.
So what type of engineering did you study?
Civil.
Civil.
Yes, really good at digging holes and keeping the water out.
So when you're at uni, was the social life more important or the study?
For me, it was the study and my extracurricular activities. I was a very keen sports person and did a lot of Kyokushin karate. So I was actually on the British team for a while and was the British silver medalist one year.
So I gather no boys gave you cheek once they found out you knew karate.
I think they'll give you cheek anyway.
What attracted you to engineering? I mean, not many ladies move that way.
I guess growing up in southern Peru, I knew I wasn't Peruvian and I would not be staying. My parents were there and a lot of the people that they associated with were there because of construction projects. So my father was involved in the Cerro Verde mine and then with the copper smelter that treated the ore. We socialized with people who were involved with the Macon and Marques, which was a major hydroelectric and irrigation scheme. And I just found that whole thing of building things that people want and need to be something that energized me. So I'm a dirty boots builder at heart.
That's fantastic. There's not a lot of people that can actually say that. So it's good to see that you actually picked something that you really enjoyed doing. When you moved back to Australia, did you stay in engineering?
Well, I moved to Australia for the first time with my husband. By that stage, if you're good at engineering, you'll run projects. And if you're good at running projects, you'll wind up running groups of projects and bits of companies and then companies. And so when I went to Spain, I was an accidental company director and was the regional manager of the Iberian Peninsula. That was my little title.
Wow, that's a title and a half.
That's a good title, especially as I don't speak Portuguese. So at that point, I went, okay, this is now serious management. I need an MBA. So I studied an MBA at the best school in Spain and did the best I could to skill myself up. I discovered that I was on the board of this subsidiary as the resident director, which means I was the one who'd go to jail if things went wrong. So I also made sure that I started to learn about corporate governance and boards and the rules around that. And really, I intended to stay in that area. But when my husband said my then fiance said he wanted to come to Australia, it was like, okay, I'll do that. And I was really fortunate. I got a job with BHP. And so I spent 5 years being responsible for the strategic planning of their Latin American operations.
Yeah.
which was fabulous. Did a lot of business development over there, really used all of my skills. And I also had a boss who was very happy for me to take on not-for-profit roles and broaden my network and put down some very strong roots into Australian society. So it was a superb 5 years and a great introduction to Australia, but not quite engineering, but management in a place where engineering was important.
So if you look back at that, I'll ask you a double-ended question here. If you look at your MBA and your engineering, what was the most important thing you learned out of those 2 degrees when you ended up at BHP? And what was the most important thing you learned not from those MBA in engineering, so outside of the university?
I think the engineering gave me a lot of confidence that I really can do this.
Yeah.
I can mix it with everybody else and still be top of the class. It's doable. So the thing I learned there was really focus on the underlying concepts, get those first principles right, and then you've got a firm platform. And yeah, Atlas was right. Give me a firm place to stand and I'll move the world.
Yes.
So really with engineering, it was that don't be afraid to go for the first principles and build that foundation.
Yeah.
Then you've got a launching pad. The thing I learned not from engineering school was I'd sort of worked out at the tender age of 18 that women and construction weren't seen as a natural mix back in the 1970s.
Not a lot has changed, unfortunately, but they've certainly made a lot of changes, but there's still a lot of residual there.
It's changing, but it is changing far too slowly.
It is.
So I knew that if I had a degree and I wanted to go and work in construction, because I wanted to be in construction, not design, I was going to have experience.
Yeah.
So I did a sandwich course, which meant that I did a period of work at university and then went out onto a building site. And of course, I was met on my first building site as a very junior engineer who was suspiciously female by a foreman whose name was Joseph. And he said, well, I'm not listening to you. You're not telling me what to do. You don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I probably know some of it, but I don't want to tell you what to do. You tell me what you need and I'll make sure you get it. And he sort of looked a bit unimpressed and I said, so let's walk around and have a look and you can tell me what you're doing and what you need to do next and I'll make sure you've got your datums and your levels and your angles and all your materials ordered and all of that stuff so you can get your bonus. And the magic word, I think, was bonus.
Bonus, yes.
Yeah, get your bonus was a very good, but we worked very well together. So that whole idea of servant leadership, and I've got my skill set and you've got your skill set, and when we put them together, that's when the magic happens. And that particular site was 3 months behind schedule when I joined. It was 6 weeks behind schedule when I finished my little traineeship.
Awesome.
So just teamwork really helped. And thinking ahead, don't think about what you're doing now, think about what you've got to do next week. So that was the engineering one. The MBA, I just learned there was so much I did not know. There were so many things about companies that I had never even thought about. And yeah, some of them like marketing and human resources and talent management, they just weren't in the lexicon of the engineering companies I'd worked for previously. So that was my key learning there was, oh my gosh, you might be in the top 0.5% of the population in terms of the level of certification you're getting, but you're actually pretty dumb, Julie. So I got that. And the main thing I learned afterwards was you can have these brilliant ideas about what to do and how to make a business succeed, but it's no use if you can't bring the other people with you.
True, very true.
So those, I think, would be my 4 learnings in the 2 baskets.
So did you happily walk away from BHP, or did you just decide to go and do something else with your life?
I don't think I've ever happily walked away from a job. I've always walked away thinking, oh, I'm going to miss them. Oh, but I did enjoy doing this bit. So I wouldn't say I happily walked away, but it was time.
Yeah.
I'd got pregnant. I was expecting my first baby. I had a job where I was spending 3 weeks in Latin America, 3 weeks here.
Yeah.
A lot of travel, a lot of stress, a lot of long hours. It wasn't going to be compatible with a small baby.
No, not at all.
Or not easily.
No.
And people were asking me the wrong question. They were asking me, when are you leaving? Instead of how much leave are you taking? And when I would correct their question and say, no, it's not when are you leaving, Julie, it's how much leave are you taking, Julie? They'd look at me and they'd say, but you can't do your job when you come back. Even if you take a year, you can't do this job with a small baby. And I was inclined to agree that I couldn't, but what I didn't agree with was the fact that we could not come to some arrangement around changing the job until I could accommodate job and family.
Yeah.
Their view was that they were just pointing out the logic that you can't do this job in this way with those other responsibilities. And at the time, KPMG were looking for somebody to head up their national practice for energy and natural resources. The only travel was going to be in Australia. I perfected the 1-day trip to Perth, which is merry hell. And I discovered that you have to fill in all sorts of funny forms if you want to bring breast milk back home with you, because you're not allowed to transport dairy products across state lines unless you've got a special license.
I'm going to say, is breast milk technically a dairy product?
Only if I'm a cow.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yes, but it was considered to be milk, and but that's okay. You, as an engineer, you just learn to solve problems. So we solved that one, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with BHP. We really focused on bringing the team together. We tripled the revenue. We kicked a lot of goals, made a lot of profit. And in fact, the person who took on the energy and natural resources group as I left is currently the chairman of KPMG, and used to be the lead auditor of BHP. And Alison Kitchen, so another lady in the industry kicking goals, which is kind of nice.
So these days you spend a lot of time being on boards as well as mentoring boards. We'll get to mentoring boards and board members in a minute. How did you transition from working for KPMG, which is one of the top companies in Australia, to being, I don't know if you call yourself a professional board member, but you have the knowledge and the ability to make a difference on boards? How did you get into that role?
Enron would be the short answer.
Yeah.
So Enron happened, Ansett collapsed. There were a few things happened, and there were issues around the closeness of the relationship between the auditors and the board and the senior executives of those companies. So an edict came around KPMG to say that if you were working for KPMG, you could not be on a board. And I said, well, I've got a contract that says I'm allowed 3 external boards as long as you don't audit them. And they said, yes, we're going to have to change that. And if you ask somebody who's a strategic planner to give up the future to keep today, they're likely to say no. It's a very good way of finding out whether people really are strategic or not.
Yeah.
So the more I thought about it, much as I loved KPMG and my job, I mean, it was just so exciting. It was great fun.
Yeah.
And the other thing with KPMG was, to my mind, it was chock full of women, because there were 3 or 4 times more women in senior levels at KPMG than there were at BHP. So I was finding that socially and from a team experience, it was a wonderful place to be.
Yeah. Well, that would have been a rarity back then, but wouldn't it?
No, I think professional services firms and accounting and auditing did have women at senior levels far earlier than industrial companies and manufacturing.
That's a fair call, yeah.
So for me, it was a big change. I mean, it was never 50%, but it was probably about 25, whereas at BHP, it was probably more like the 5 to 10.
So you've sat on some amazing boards. I mean, I've sat on some boards, but not at the same level as you, and I know how some people can react. Did anyone ever tell you, you'll never be a board member, you don't have the skills, what are you doing here, you're a female, all those horrible comments? Anyone say that to you?
Yes, when I mean, my first board was a total accident, so definitely I wasn't a board member, but legally I was. So I had to protect myself and learn to do the job well. But when I had got settled in Australia, I did the AICD company directors course. And if you're serious about a career on boards, doing a recognized qualification, it's not enough to get you a board seat, but together with your own expertise, it will definitely enhance your career. So I was sitting late at night in my office, reading through the 2 telephone books worth of papers that you get when you do that course.
Yes.
And one of the senior executives came down the corridor and he poked his head around my door and said, "What are you doing, Julie?" And I said, "Oh, I'm studying the company directors course. I'm doing this course and got a session tomorrow, so I'm getting ready for it." And he looked at me and went, "But you're not director material."
Oh.
And I said, "Well, I'm director material. I just haven't been cut to shape yet." And he looked very confused because, of course, having grown up in South America, I will use metaphor and analogy and simile. Yeah. That's the way I speak. And this particular gentleman was very much more inclined to the, well, no, you're a strategic planner. You sit in an office and you strategic plan all day. Yes. That's different to being a director. Well, it sort of is and sort of isn't, because strategy is a large part of your role as a director. Even if you're only signing off on it, you have to understand what it is and why it works and that it's good enough. So having spent most of my life being told, but women don't do engineering. Oh, but women can't run an engineering office. Oh, but women can't go overseas. Oh, but women can't do this. Women shouldn't do karate. Women shouldn't do martial arts. It was like, oh, for goodness sake, it just rolled off the back. And I just went, well, you know, I'm doing it. And I did it. And it was a great foundation for me. Then, of course, having done it, I went, right, now I've got to put it into practice. And this is where that whole issue of your expertise and experience and that qualification coming together finds the sweet spot. Because, of course, I looked around for boards. BHP, I was not allowed to work on a paid board, only unpaid boards. So I looked for someone, well, who would need me what do I have that might be useful to them? Because there were plenty of boards I'd like to be on, but I couldn't see a rational line for why would they like me?
Yeah.
Unless they were desperate for someone who could fog a mirror. Because I can do that. But the whole issue of looking at it and saying, well, look, if I'm the director product, who's the buyer for that?
Yeah.
And then I discovered, I was just asking around, and that's the other thing is when you want to be a director, do not ask everyone to help you find a board seat. All you'll do is irritate everyone.
Yes.
And you'll probably be signaling to them that you're not a director. What you need to do is let people know that you're interested in boards and governance, but not ask. And somebody, one of my friends, oh, you're interested, I'm on this board. And she started telling me about the Melbourne University Engineering Foundation, which is a board that gives grants to engineers who are suffering hardship halfway through their course. Wow, that's brilliant. So instead of dropping out, you help them finish. And the amazing thing was that a lot of them then donate back over the course of their careers. So one of the things I noticed on my 2 degrees was in England, I did engineering, they gave me a degree and they said goodbye. In Spain, I did an MBA, they gave me a degree and they said, now, have you signed up for the alumni program? What events have you put yourself down for? What continuing education? What further develop? They had their hands in my pockets, they are there still. And so what I said, I was talking with this friend and she was saying, some of them donate and they come back and they love us, but most of them we just lose. And I said, oh, because my MBA school has this thing called an alumni program and my engineering school doesn't. And she said, oh, how does that work? I said, I don't know, but quid pro quo, because I'm a member of the alumni program. And as luck would have it, the person who ran the program at the time was Gonzalo Garland, and he was a Garland from the Garlands of Lima in Peru. And I was a Garland from these amazing Garlands who just appeared for a period of time in Arequipa. So we knew of each other. And he was very surprised when I popped up in Madrid and studied with him, let alone when I then joined the alumni. So, of course, I just phoned him up late one night and said, Gonzalo, how does this work? And how do you do it? And how do you... And then I took that information and we turned it into something that would work with an Australian cohort of engineers. And with that organization, we built an alumni program and we built some events, the 50 years on lunch, which is amazing. People coming back 50 years after they've graduated. But just a series of events and touch points to stay engaged and to allow people to know that we were there and we were still active and start them mentoring students as they come through and building those bridges. It was really good fun. It was a superb board, but they, which is more important, thought I was a superb director because I came with something they needed but didn't yet have. And that, I think, is a crucial thing when you're looking for your next board step, is always look, what did I learn from the steps I've done so far? And which boards need that information? So that you're constantly developing and you're constantly targeting boards who, when they see you, go, oh, wow, yeah, we want that.
Look, that's so true. I was talking to the chairman of a board who is one of Australia's largest national charities. And on their board, they have skill sets. And say you're the skill set in marketing that you're on their board. for you to sit on this board, one, you have to bring in $40,000 a year in charitable donations. So they make it. But secondly, if you choose to leave, you cannot leave until they've found someone else with the same skill set that you have. And he explained to me about exactly what you said. It's so important to have those different skill sets on a board. So when someone is looking to go on boards, again, it's like going for a job, isn't it? Where you've got to say, well, this is my skill set. Have I got something to offer the board or don't? Because what's the use of being on a board and you're an accountant if there's 5 other accountants? It's not going to work.
Yes.
So when your clients these days, a lot of them are board members and people looking to get on boards. What do you see when they come to you as their biggest challenges at the moment on boards where it's not functioning or it's just not working properly? Where do you see them coming back to you? And when you have a review of that board, what pops up most commonly?
That's a good question. I wish I had a good answer. I find every board and every director is quite unique. Common problems at the moment, people are quite traumatized. They've been through a long, prolonged crisis.
Yes.
And so where you have a board and there are tensions or issues under the stress of that crisis for this amount of time, that makes those stresses and issues worse. So I'm seeing a lot of things that would have been successfully managed in the past that are now starting to feel like the final straw.
Yeah.
Seeing a tremendous interest as well in employee culture and well-being and psychological safety.
Oh, yes.
There's also a little bit of an epidemic of people claiming that directors or entire boards have bullied them. And this is executives and other board members. So there's a lot more awareness that you need to consider the psychological or the emotional well-being as well as the performance and the physical health and safety. And that includes the board as well as the executive. I think that's something that a lot of boards are now grappling with because it's veering into the personal.
It is, yes. It is. I was talking to someone who was on a board, and their senior execs that they spoke to were very good with the tongue, good with the words. And it took them a while, and they couldn't work out why they were making decisions and doing this and instructing the executives to go one way, but they were hearing what we call white noise out of the business. What happens when you see a board that through one way or another has become disengaged with the business, don't want to overstep their mark because they employ executives, but what they're hearing from the executives doesn't match what they're hearing from customers and employees? How do you bridge that gap?
Fast would be the short answer. Look, there are, I think, 4 things that you have to do if you're on the board.
Yes.
The first one is you've got to understand your role and you've got to build the connection between you and the other directors and the board.
Yes.
You've got to make sure that you've got good oversight of the company. So that's number 2, is that. And when I say good oversight, I mean so good that if you've made a bad decision, you know it's bad and you can fix it quickly before it gets any worse. Genghis Khan used to talk about his spies. He'd say, I have some spies who tell me the ingredients in my enemy's soup, and I have others who tell me the flavor.
Wow.
And you want directors to understand the flavor. And by that, I mean, know the rhythms of the business, understand what are the critical success factors, really deeply. And it's not the same as delivering or managing or doing, it's knowing. And it's the flavor of the governance, not the recipe.
Does that come with experience?
It comes with experience, and I think a little bit with humility, but it also comes with knowing your role and understanding that your role is governance, not management, unless you're an executive director. And again, we talk about boards. Hang on, I'll finish the 4 things you have to do as a board first before I get sidetracked into something else. But you've got to connect the director to the board and the role. You've got to connect the board with really good oversight to the company. You need to connect the whole company to strategy. And this is where I think that white noise comes in, is when the company's rolling on with operations as usual, and the strategy is going somewhere slightly different. I've never seen a strategy that says we're going to stay exactly as we are and not change a thing. So it's that question of managing and making sure that your strategy is relevant and good. And then the final area where most boards really suffer is closing that loop and saying, does this strategy meet the needs, bless you, of the stakeholders? Because if it doesn't, it's going to fail. Either the strategy is going to fail or the business is going to fail, because if your strategy doesn't meet the needs of your stakeholders, you're in big trouble. So I'd say those are the 4 things that I find that directors really need to work on. And it gets harder, conversely, in the bigger companies where you have an entire investor relations department and community relations department and PR department, because they usurp the ability of the board to hear from those communities. It's not so much that you want to be talking to them, but you want to hear what they are saying. So those are the 4 things I think you need to work on. And then the other thing, and this goes back to that point about there's a board for everybody. Oils ain't oils and boards ain't boards. An operating board is actually a fantastic thing for the right sort of company. If you are in an engineering or an architectural practice, and the head of water division and the head of bridges and transport and the head of housing and construction each run an area and they are the 3 directors on the board, that's a beautiful model and it works really well. But it's very different to the plain vanilla listed company model that most of the governance gurus will teach you, which is an independent governing board that doesn't do management, that doesn't deliver. So understanding there are operating boards, there are advisory boards, there are policy governance boards, there are supervisory boards, very common in the government sector to have supervisory boards. And then there are your full-fledged strategic governing boards. And they require a different commitment from the directors. They require a different focus. They have different strengths and weaknesses when it comes to their ability to implement governance. And some people will love one and hate another. So finding the right board for the right person is not just, oh, you're an animal lover, this is an animal profit, not-for-profit company. Isn't that wonderful? It's you're a hands-on sort of person. You can't bear working at the strategic level. This is an operating board.
So how does a person decide what's going to be the best board for them?
I would suggest sit down and talk to people who know you. Talk to people who are on the board or closely associated with it about how does this, and this is the other thing, is there are people who've got 30 years experience on boards, but if I said to them, is your board more operating, advisory, supervisory, policy, or full-fledged governing? They'd look at me as if I had 5 heads. True. And they wouldn't know how to answer. So you need to say, well, how does your board deal with this? How does your board get involved in that? How does management interact with the board on these issues? And do your due diligence, really do your due diligence. understand what you're getting into before you get in. Because that, I think, is the way to find the right board, is to really make sure that you're passionate about what they do, you understand how they do it. And so I talk about finding something that's got your skills, which is the what, it's got your values, which is the why, and it's got your behavioral preferences, which is the how. And you need to find all three of those in something that then fits within your time constraints and your career trajectory. Because I also like to talk about progression planning rather than succession planning, so that people, as they leave a board, are fit for their next step. Rather than just being elbowed off because, oh, you've done your 6 years. That's not very nice.
A lot of people are under the misconception that it's only the big boards with the big directors can get into legal trouble.
Oh, no.
A lot of them don't realise you can be on a charity board, a small board, and you are just as much exposed as those people in the high-flying boards. How do you deal with that when someone, or what should someone do if someone's approached and said, look, would you like to come on our board? Just for someone who's never, ever been on a board before, what would you say to them?
97% of ASIC's criminal convictions are against people on not-for-profits and small businesses.
Oh, no.
Oh, dear. And that's really good research from Professor Ian Ramsey from the Melbourne Business School. So that is peer-reviewed quality research. That is not me plucking a number out of the air like 80% of the so-called statistics you see on the internet. I've got, in fact, if anybody wants to contact me, I can send them a copy of his paper. It's enlightening reading. But what I would say is the rules are there.
Yeah.
If you choose to play the game, understand the rules. There's a big difference between saying, I'm going to go and do some sport taekwondo sparring, and saying, I'm going to get into the ring and actually have a go at doing 12 rounds of professional boxing. There's a huge difference, and you can get hurt either way. So I've seen people who've been on big listed company boards, excellent directors, go on to a tiny not-for-profit, and it all goes pear-shaped because they're not accustomed to not being able to ask management for reports on things because management haven't got the time and resources to deliver. They're not accustomed to not getting a lawyer look over things because the company doesn't have a budget for legal advice or not a big enough one.
And ignorance is no excuse, is it?
Ignorance is no excuse. In fact, as I've heard it said occasionally from judges, they can study the law whilst they're serving their sentence.
Ouch.
Ooh, that hurts. And yeah, it is a responsible position. And it needs to be held by responsible people. So I really, really strongly refute this. The statistics, most directors don't get into trouble.
Yep, true.
Probably there's more that should get into trouble but don't.
Yep.
However, it is the big board directors who mostly, even if they do get into trouble, get off or get lenient treatment because they are well defended. Yes. They're well insured, they've got great legal advice, they've got the financial strength. Look at Elmer Funke Cooper, who was the CEO of the ASX, and there were allegations about something that happened. He was able to step off his full-time day job, spend a couple of years working on his defense, not being on any boards or working as a senior executive, paying his lawyers all that time, and then be found, okay, yes, you're innocent, it's all right, you can continue. That is brilliant. The man is brilliant. But most of us could not afford those 2 years. And until you get to the end and you get that not guilty statement, you are not able to go on to other boards or do other things. So in fact, very often you'll find that at the smaller end of town, people just collapse and take the rap, which is really sad because some of them are actually far more defensible than some of the big names at the top end of town. And you've only got to look at the royal commissions, some of the recent court cases, and you can tell that there are directors at that level who are clearly not alert and aware of the risks and responsibilities in their role. And then you look at the smaller end of town and you see people who know the risks and responsibilities, but they just haven't got the tools and resources to manage them, and it's heartbreaking. But as long as they remain humble and keep learning, they can put in place poor man's governance, which will, for most of them, if they're honest, will be enough. And again, the ACNC, if you're in a not-for-profit, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, is a very friendly regulator. Their first focus is, can we fix you? Actually, their first focus is, can we tell you what to do and you can go away and fix yourselves? Then their second focus is, can we fix you? So if you've been dealing with them and you've got to the stage where they're in punitive, we're calling ASIC, we're prosecuting, we're dissolving you, we're cancelling your register, you're a seriously bad board.
But it's not all doom and gloom. My final question to you about boards is, what's the best thing in your mind about being on a board?
For me, it's the leverage. It's the ability to have an impact and build an organization that is going to do things and continue doing things after I have left, simply because I was there for those few important decisions.
Legacy.
And a lot of board work is quite boring. That's why they're called boards.
They're boring,
But those big decisions and the satisfaction of looking back and seeing a company that's still doing well because you made a good decision back then, I just love it. I just love the whole team-based work, but mostly I think it's the leverage. It's that building the company that's going to make the changes in the world that I want to see.
So if I turn around and gave you a beautiful boardroom in the top of in Phillip Street in Sydney, looking out over Sydney Harbour, and I went, you know what, Julie, you can invite 3 people in your life to sit at that board, share a nice wine, a piece of cheese, and have a chat. And they don't have to be from business. Who would you invite and why?
I'd invite Ram Charan.
Yep.
He is a board and governance person from America. He is very, very insightful, wickedly humorous, and really good fun. I would invite Jackie Chan.
Jackie Chan, why?
Yes, because he's cute.
Never heard Jackie Chan being described as cute, but okay.
Actually, somebody once interviewed him and they said, you know, what do you like best about being an actor? And he said, oh, it's all the attention. And they looked at him and they said, do you get as much attention as George Clooney and Brad Pitt? He said, I get better attention because people don't think I'm handsome. They just think I'm cute. And I thought that was a brilliant answer. But he would, for me, he has such discipline at being good at what he's good at that he makes it look effortless and fun.
True.
And when you see a director who's absolutely at the top of their game, they make it look effortless and fun. And then I think to round it out, I would probably invite Ronnie Kahn or Elizabeth Proust, or both.
Or both.
Because, you know, a bottle of wine, more than 4 people can share.
I think you need more than one bottle of wine with that group.
Possibly.
So look, I have people from, especially all over Australia, listen in, and most of them are on boards of one form or another, be from a school board to a business board or a non-for-profit, especially in some charity boards. If they wanted to get in touch with you and find out a little bit more about what you do and if you can help them or help their board, how do they do that?
The easiest way is to reach out to me through LinkedIn.
Yep.
Because there is no other Julie Garland McLellan on LinkedIn. It's quite an unusual name. The website, mcclellan.com.au or directorsdilemma.com.
Yep.
They can subscribe to my newsletter, which is a free monthly newsletter.
Awesome.
But otherwise, don't be shy. I have my phone number and my email address on my websites and on my profile, precisely so that people can contact me if they wish to. And I'm always happy to talk to other directors. And if you see me in the departure lounge at the airport when COVID is no longer a thing, or in the AICD member lounge, or floating around the Governance Institute, come up and say hi. I just love meeting new directors.
Oh, that's absolutely awesome. You know, someone said to me, you know, who are you interviewing today, Rob? And I told them, they said, how's that going to be interesting? I said, well, I don't know until I interview her. And you know what? You've actually made it very interesting. I think you've taught a lot of people a lot just by hearing your stories and hearing exactly what it's like to be on a board and some of the traps and some of the tips. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. I know we can't do much in Sydney today because of COVID, but we are still out and about and still being able to enjoy ourselves. I look forward to seeing you on the news as the new chairman of some of the biggest boards in Australia and continuing to shake the tree, as we say. So thank you again so much, and we will catch you again. This won't be the last time we have a chat, I'm sure. And as I say at the end of every one of my podcasts, have a groovy day.
Thank you. I will.